Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I'm going to be walking you through the latest Criterion dungeon, another Aloalo Island. Specifically, I'm going to be walking you through the Savage version, but normal mode and Savage have the exact same mechanics. So if you're looking to get into the content, I'm going to explain all the mechanics in detail, how we learned them, how we figured them out, and ways that I think we could do them better. Because we actually deliberately opted into some suboptimal strats because it was the first way we learned it, and we were just trying to get the initial clear done. So that's usually why I do this style of guide, is when I don't really feel 100% confident in what we do being what I advise other people do. So it makes it easier to explain. So because we're doing Savage, as a reminder for Criterion Savage, there's no rezzing allowed. You have to beat the entire dungeon within a set time limit. In this case, it's about 23 minutes and 50 seconds. And that is from the very first trash pack that you pull all the way to the final boss. In normal mode, you don't have to do that. You just have to clear the whole dungeon before the instance timer goes off. You can wipe as many times as you want. And you can only raise using the Criterion or the variant raise action. So you only get a handful of raises per fight. So you got to make sure that you limit those deaths, but otherwise the mechanics and everything are identical. The Savage mode's also just a little bit higher in the damage and the amount of health the bosses have as well. So for Aloalo, the first trash pack is fortunately a pretty easy one. It's still kind of easy to screw up, but it's not that bad overall. There's 4 different trash packs. You're going to want to just pull them one at a time. 2 of the trash packs are just one standalone mob, and the other 2 are a group of 3 mobs, though one big mob really does all the mechanics. For this first bit, you're just killing this Kiwakin, and this thing just does a couple of tank busters and then a dodgeable tail screw that it'll aim at the ground. The big thing for this first trash pack is going to be these tornadoes. They rotate in a very set pattern. So as long as you find a spot that's comfortable, for example, we prefer this kind of corner over here in this initial section, you can just rotate around them as they come through, but you need to make sure they don't inhibit your ability to dodge other attacks coming out of these enemies. So the second pack is going to have 2 small crabs, but the snipper, the big mob right here, does that split damage AoE, and then does a bubble shower followed by a crab dribble. Bubble shower is a frontal AoE. It's immediately followed by crab dribble, which is a rear AoE. These types of crabs do that attack a lot, so it's not all too uncommon. Just means stack up for the first hit, the AoE hit, and then just make sure you get to its flank while dodging the tornadoes. Then you have the Ray. Again, the 2 little mobs here just are auto attack damage. They're no big deal, but of course on Savage you have to pay them some mind. First attack from the Ray is Hydro Cannon. It is a block AoE. It fires in front of it, so just get behind it so you don't get hit. Expulsion is a point blank AoE, and Electric Whirl is a donut, so get out and then in. We only ever saw this order, Expulsion into Electric Whirl. We never once in the dozens and dozens and dozens of pulls ever saw it the other way. So if it can go the other way, that's really unfortunate for anyone trying to be informed by this. And the final mob is the Monk. This thing's going to fire 3 hydro shots at the non-tanks, which will knock them back and give them a pretty powerful dot. And then it'll do a tank buster and then repeat over and over again. You can knockback resist the hydro shot, and I do recommend doing that so you avoid getting thrown into the tornadoes. And if you're on Savage, these hit really hard. You need a really set mitt plan to make sure that these hydro shots don't just tick through and kill people, because they do a ton of damage over their duration. Tank Buster also, of course, hits quite hard. You know, you don't want to mess around with that. Now, if you're on Savage, I highly recommend not using 2 minutes on this Monk. You want to save that for the boss. It can get a little tough on the healer because they really don't want to have to deal with a second batch of hydro shots, which start coming out here. Fortunately, the dot goes away as soon as the Monk dies, but you really want a resource pool for the boss itself. That way you can make sure you get ahead of the boss DPS check in case anything goes wrong here and you just get a damage down or something of the like. For the first boss, we have Kekaduk. Now, I am going to start using pausing to kind of explain things now that we're past the trash. I don't want to just do it all the way through. And the first thing I want to make note of is our markers. So the grid here for the arena is set into 4 rows and 4 columns, a 4x4 arena. The big thing here is we have the letter markers along the north side and we have the number markers along the west side. You can see that on our mini map right up here. So you can orient that however you want, but the idea is we're going to be using these to call out safe rows and columns for the very first mechanic, actually. That's the whole reason we even have these markers in the first place. So let's get to that and you'll see why that we actually do that. So start the fight. Yeah, Tidal Roar, AoE, leaves a dot behind. Make sure you mid it. Make sure you deal with the dot. And actually pretty important to make sure you're healthy coming out of this dot, because there is another raid wide that hits just as hard, if not a little harder, coming out of the boss after this initial cast. So Spring Crystals is the major mechanic of the entire boss. It summons crystals of two different kinds. Some are little, I guess they're circles. They're really not. They're just like, there's polygons of some kind. And then you have these kind of long rectangular crystals. Now, if you did normal mode, you probably recognize these. But these crystals basically fire an AoE along a row or column, depending on their orientation. This one right here, you can see the long way, the kind of, I guess, the fat side of it is facing along the row 4. That's the row that it's going to hit when it explodes. And then there's other ones that are oriented differently. Bubble Net, by the way, is that AoE that hits hard. So you can see this one over by A. That's going to hit the entire A column. That's the orientation you're looking at to determine what they're going to hit. Now, the big thing with this mechanic is that Bubble Net is not only going to do a bunch of damage to the team and give them debuffs, but it's actually going to raise all 4 of these spring crystals into a bubble. And then by the end of the mechanic, it's going to have moved them over 2 rows or 2 columns. So the easiest way to look at this is all of these are going to be shifted 2 rows or columns depending on what they're hitting. So that mechanic over here, the Spring Crystal by A, that's going to get shifted over to C, guaranteed, which means C will be dangerous later. The one on D is guaranteed going to get shifted over to B, which means B is danger later. So that's how you would determine like the A and D columns are safe, which is what we use for our call outs. And then for the rows, it's the same. You can see there's one in row 2 and one in row 4. Those are basically going to swap. So we know that rows 1 and 3 are safe. As soon as these crystals are down, you can start determining what will be safe later. So you don't have to wait super long. You can focus on everything as the boss does it, one at a time. And it is crucial that you learn this part as quickly as possible, because in my opinion, this was the hardest mechanic of this entire boss. And it being the first mechanic means you have to get through it as cleanly as possible. So Bubble Net does a bunch of raid-wide damage as well. You can see we actually get dropped to like 20-something thousand even after the AoE before. But we also get a handful of debuffs when these get raised into bubbles. 2 of them are binds and 2 of them are bubbles. Players that are marked with bubbles are actually going to be lifted like these crystals here and also shifted over. Now, there are multiple shifts that can happen, but generally speaking, the bubbles are just going to get shifted over too, just like the crystals. At least that's the plan that we're going for with our positioning later. It'll make more sense when I actually get to the part where everything gets knocked back. Now, on top of that, you either get Hydro Fall or Hydro Bullet. Hydro Fall is going to mark either both the DPS or both the supports with a split damage AoE, and that means that you need to end up in pairs at the end of this entire mechanic after people have been knocked back and bound. You need to make sure that 2 players end up on top of each other. If it's Hydro Bullet, the players all need to end up spread out from each other. Fortunately, I do have both examples in this video, so I can show you the other one later. So the way we do this is, actually, let me wait till the next part, because again, it makes more sense once I have the entire mechanic on the screen, because there's one last element here that needs to be considered. So at this point, we've already called AD column safe, 1-3 rows safe. The final bit here is this. These just designate the order these are going to be knocked back. Honestly, we barely even consider the 1s and the 2s outside of where we want our final positioning to be. So the way we do it is, or the way that we intended to do it, is the players that are marked with bubbles, in this case it's both the supports, will stand in the 2 sections and get pushed to a 1 section. No matter what, a bubble is going to end up in a 1 square, because even if they started in a 1 square, they would get pushed to a 2 and then pushed to a 1. So we just ideally send the bubbles to the 2s and they get pushed to the correct spot in the 1s. Whereas the players that are bound need to either be there to greet the players with the bubbles as they get knocked back, and you'll see that in a second with this pattern, or in the spread equivalent, they need to stand in the 2s because the bubble players will get pushed to 1 so they can make sure they're spread out. So it's just about matching what your debuff is to where the safe rows and columns are to what the actual end resolve is, if it's spread or stack. So because we have stacks here, we want all 4 players to end up in the safe area in each 1 square. So I'm going to get matched with my healer, and the melee is going to get matched with their tank. You know, we did ranged group and melee group. Honestly, probably shouldn't have. I'd recommend doing ranged with tank, melee with healer for a lot of these mechanics, but we just went with the basic, you know, range together, melee together, worked out fine. So I know that A and D are safe and 1 and 3 are safe. So I know that I need to end up in a 1 square because it's going to be the split damage AoE. So I go D and 3, and I just walk over to the very center of D and 3. And then when the debuffs wear off, I will be bound in place, and the other players with the bubbles will be marked. My healer goes to a spot that will get them to me, and the tank goes to a spot that will get them to their melee. So you can see the bubbles get pushed. They get pushed again. The player with the bubble is dropped right on top of me. Those all explode in line AoEs, like we explained earlier, and then bam, the split damage AoE comes down. It's a lot of just taking each piece of information one at a time, learning how to read it one at a time, and then executing it all at the end. It's a lot of very set rules, very few variables in terms of where you'll end up at the very end of it, but it's very confusing. It is the hardest mechanic to learn in this entire boss, so take your time and get really used to identifying how those crystals are going to move and what rows and columns are safe. Say that out loud over and over again before you ever consider any other bit. Now, as for deciding where the bubbles are going to go, we actually did a rule where the melees are always going to end the mechanic on the north side of the room, and the ranged are always going to end the mechanic on the south side of the room. So it means that basically the healer went up and over to make sure that they were on the north side of the room and would get knocked south, and the tank came to the south side of the room and made sure they would get knocked to the north side. So you'll see me do that same type of movement later for the spread. And that'll make it, you know, just a little bit easier to understand. That's just like a set rule we made. You don't have to make that rule. You can do it however you want. But that was just a really clear way for us to communicate it that I feel like worked incredibly well. See, we're on the south side. You can see the tank and the melee on the north side. And that's it. That's the first mechanic. And again, in my opinion, that's the hardest one. Now, this one is one of those mechanics I would not recommend doing it the way we did it. So you're going to get either Hydro Bullet first and then Hydro Fall, or Hydro Fall first and then Bullet. Bullet is the spread, Fall is the stack. So that's going to determine your movement. We got spread then stack, and essentially we're going to have to dodge AoEs traveling across the room and AoEs under our feet while making sure to fulfill these conditions. Now, the spreads are enormous. So you have to be very careful about being far away. You can't just be in separate quadrants of the room, because if you're still too close to each other, but in opposite quadrants, you'll kill each other. So you'll see it right here, how large the AoE itself is. But we got spread first. So I go to my quadrant of the room. We basically had predetermined quadrants that we were going to solve these in. Again, range south side of the room, melee north side of the room, and then we split off, you know, supports on one side, DPS on the other. And when Hydro Bomb starts casting, we start dodging the AoEs. After the second AoE, the first mechanic will resolve. That's about the size you're looking at for the spread AoE. And as you can see, we are all just kind of dodging the same way I'm dodging, sort of, on our side of the room. The melees and the tanks are dodging riskier. But the idea is you're supposed to do this and then follow an AoE either clockwise or counterclockwise. This is why I don't recommend doing what we did. We actually just make it a rule that no matter what, the Hydro Falls are done on the north and south side, like as close to that center line between our two quadrants. So look at what the healer has to do. There's 2 bubbles coming at them from here. They're waiting for these 2 bubbles to move, and there's 2 bubbles here. They essentially have to squeeze through this little section before they get snapshotted into this bubble. We failed this maybe only 2 or 3 times in all of our attempts throughout normal and savage, but it was a risk we didn't have to take because we could have very easily just followed through with this. They could have just, I mean, for this, they basically want to go up north. You can see over here, the healer would have wanted to have gone up this way and met the melee, and the tank would have come down this way and met me here. That would have been the easiest movement to do. And then if the pattern is reversed, where we kind of have to start in a different spot, we would do it the other way. Even if you start with the Hydro Fall first, that still works, because then the difference is one person would follow that away from the other person who stays in the same quadrant that you just did the split damage AoE in. So this was simple for us. We never changed it because we had a very low fail rate. We were almost always completely successful here. But it does come with the risk of a bubble snapshotting you, grabbing you, and then you're dead. So I personally was not a huge fan. I wanted to change this. We never did. But then we group up. We have to dodge 3 more at ground AoEs while also doing the pairs. And then we go. The other option, of course, being you do the pairs first, stay together, do the movement, and then separate in very much the same way the healer ran over to me. And then you just all have to be in your own separate quadrants. We, with this very jank strat, found spread first to be the easier mechanic, just because it's easier to group up than it is to separate with the jank that comes with it. So I highly recommend not doing it the way you just saw it there, unless you are just sure that you don't mind. That's it. If you just don't mind, then you don't mind. Go ahead, do it. No skin off my back. That was probably the second hardest mechanic. Although the next one, no, not the next one. The next one's really easy. The next one is either both the DPS or both the supports will get a Hydrofall. This is always a Hydrofall. And then there's just going to be a few AoEs. You just need to stay together for this, split damage AoE while dodging an in and an out and dodging the AoEs that are coming from the outside. That's all it is. So encroaching means in first and then out. And the other one is receding, which means out first and then in. And then you can see these AoEs that are forming there. So, we're just going to stay out of that section, in, then move into the AoE it left behind while moving out. Split damage AoE, done. Nothing fancy about that. That's just like a traditional 1-2 dance for Final Fantasy XIV content. No biggie. Next mechanic. Actually, this might be the second hardest mechanic right here. Oh, if you're wondering where that Vuln stat came from the warrior, they got hit by the in-out. So, tank privilege. So now, everybody's going to get a Hydro Bullet. This is always a guaranteed bullet for a spread. And these 4 adds are going to spawn. So, these 4 adds are going to play kind of similarly to the Spring Crystals from before. They all do a baited 180-degree AoE towards the nearest player. The difference being, 2 of them are going to be lifted off of the ground by the bubble, like the Spring Crystals were earlier, and there are Spring Crystals coming here too. And the players are also either going to be bound or bubbled. The bubbled players need to not get hit by the bubbled adds, and the ground players need to not get hit by the ground adds. So you need the bubble players baiting the adds that aren't bubbled, and the non-bubbled players baiting the bubbled adds. So you're just basically making sure you have the opposite of whatever the ad has. So we all start here by kind of picking an ad. We have supports north and west and the DPS east and south. And we're just getting into that position way in advance. Now, there are Spring Crystals here, and these work the same way. These are going to hit all the rows and columns. But there's only 3 possible safe spots here, or 3 possible patterns of safe spots. It's either all 4 corners, or the 4 squares directly east and west. So it'd be like the middle east and west squares, or the middle north and south squares. So you can see as soon as you see a Spring Crystal in the corner, the corners aren't safe. And then if you see the Spring Crystals are east and west, north and south is safe. So these are really quick and easy to identify compared to the other ones. These crystals will not move, so you don't have to worry about any of that. Now, finally, we're going to get bubble netted here. This still hits really hard, so don't joke around with it. And at this point, you're going to have about 10 seconds to figure out what it is you need to do. So we actually get really lucky in this particular one. Both the DPS have the ground AoEs, and both of our ads are bubbled. So we actually can just take our same ad. So you can kind of see what the movement looks like when you don't need to adjust. But the way we otherwise do it is that players just go clockwise until they reach an ad that they can take. And if that ad is already taken by somebody with the buff, they go 1 more over. So like if I needed to go over clockwise and our DPS also needed to, essentially he would know to just go swap with the tank. That just came with a lot of experience and practice. But the idea would be he'd go clockwise all the way around, 270 degrees of the clock to get to his ad. Once we have the ad recognized, we go to the safe spot clockwise of our ad. So in this case, it's north and south are safe. And mine's here, so I'm going to go to the first square that's clockwise safe, and that's just the square right to the back left. Now, we do have those Hydro Bullets, which means it's quite risky. You can see our Dragoon not taking any chances, throwing as many Piercing Talons as they can. They got really comfortable with Piercing Talons this Criterion, let me tell you. Because if you're too close, those spreads, they're still very large. You just don't want to take any risks here. So, bam, you can see we're kind of, I think he hits to about here with his. So, we have a little bit of leeway, but, not messing around. The big thing here is that you now have about 3 seconds, a little bit less than 3 seconds, to get to a bait spot for your ad. Now, we actually, I would say we made this a little harder on ourselves as well. What we really could have done is been kind of in this square. So right about here, we all could have been. So we don't have to move as much to bait our ad. We decided to kind of just aim them directly out, which leaves not a lot of room for leeway either. So this is another thing I think can be improved in the way we did it. But, you know, we just sprinted and I on-avanted and we just ran to the spot and baited. So you'll see the players with the bubbles. See this player over here standing next to an ad that's on the ground. They're going to bait that. I'm on the ground and I'm baiting the ad with the bubble. You'll see them all aim out. That one's a little bit off, but that's perfectly fine. It's not hitting the player to the north. And then you'll see everything in a bubble gets thrown up. All the AoEs go off. We all dodge everything, and we're good to go. And that's it. That's one of the other hardest mechanics. The next mechanic's pretty easy. It's a little bit visually confusing, but one of the easier mechanics to actually execute. So this one's either going to be spread first and then pair, or pair first and then spread. We did ranged west, melee east, and you are going to have to split the room. This can be arm's length. This is going to knock back this attack. It can be arm's length, but be very careful about knockback resisting it. Because if all 4 people were to knockback resist from this position right here, we would die if it was spread. Like if we were to all knockback resist and stand right along the AoE, we would kill each other on the other side of the room. So we just let the melees do their knockback resist regardless of spread or pairs first. And we just, as the range, we just rode the knockback. It also makes sense, honestly, for the second part, because we take our pair here and then both the melees get full melee uptime. And so they just stay in range right there. And we all back out here to make sure we don't overlap. So you can see there's still tons of room. Like they actually only reach to about here. So I could have been like as far up as here or whatnot, but there's no real reason for me to be that far up. It would help with healing a little bit though. So it's worth a consideration at the very least. Now, the next thing that happens is a bunch of spring crystals are going to appear. These do point blank AoEs. They're not super big, but they're large enough to consider. And these are also going to be lifted by bubbles, and some of them are going to be sent to the other side of the room. Some of them are going to stay on this side. The big thing is that when this bubble net casts, and make sure you're healed up and you mitt for this bubble net, because like all the other ones, it hurts quite bad. There's also going to be normal bubbles that appear here, and a player can step in that bubble and get sent to the other side. Now, whichever side has all the crystals at the start is only going to have 1 tower that a player needs to stand in for the next mechanic. The other side is going to have 3 towers. So one of the 2 players on the side with all the crystals is going to need to ride a bubble to the other side. The way we did this is we used basically our spread positions that you saw there. So like I was northwest, the tank was northeast, the melee was southeast, and the healer was southwest. If you're on the crystal side, whichever quadrant of the room belongs to you, if that side has basically no crystals, you saw all the crystals spawned right by me and the other side was kind of open, it's mostly bubbles. That player is the one who's going to ride the bubble across from the crystal side to the other side to get one of the towers. I, however, just need to avoid everything on my side and just stay here and grab that tower once everything resolves. Now, it's worth remembering, these crystals, they're going to get sent over, then they're going to explode. The one right next to the tower here is also going to explode. You'll see that. And then you need to make sure you get into the tower. I do have a safe spot there, but on the other side, it's much more dangerous. The side where the crystals get blown to, they basically completely engulf 2 of the 3 towers. So you need to stay out of the tower and then run in afterwards. Then bam, they get 3 towers on their side. I get 1 tower on mine, and we're good to go. Simple as that. And at that point, you've seen every mechanic. It now repeats the first mechanic, but does the opposite of pretty much everything. So again, same deal, that's going to be A and C safe. And I think that's 2 and 4 safe. Let's see, that's going to be, I can't see where the other crystal is. So it's 2 and 4 safe for that one. So now I have the bubble. I'm going to end on the south side of the room. So as soon as I see the bubble, I go to the north side of the room. I'm going to ride the 2 marker, which is sending me south over there. Now this is spread. So I need to end up in a quadrant by myself. So there shouldn't be any player over there waiting for me. 2s will always get knocked to 1s. And during spreads, if you're bound, you have to go to the 2 quadrant as well, because that's where your final safe spot's going to be. So we know that it's, I think I said it was A and C is going to be safe. And then it should be 2 and 4. So I'm going to A and 4. That's the spot I'm going to get knocked to. You can see they're going with, they're going to go there and wait. It was A and 1. My bad. It was 1 and 4, not 2 and 4. I couldn't see all of them properly. But yeah, you see they just wait, and then I get sent away, and we're all safe. And that's just what it looks like from the other side. When you're actually being knocked by the bubble, that's the perspective of it. And then it's going to be the in-out mechanic with the pairs. This is the last mechanic. Then it's a raid wide. Then it's enrage. So it's fairly simple. So that's the entirety of the first boss. Reading the spring crystals really is key. This is receding. So you see we go out and then in together. Bam. So because we're on Savage, we are trying to kind of pool a bit of resources here to make sure we can do the next trash pack cleanly. Next trash pack's not that bad, but it can definitely catch you a little bit off guard at the start. We didn't mean to hold the LB here. That was just us focusing. That was just the hyper focus. But there you go. You hit the Enrage cast. I think right there. Yeah, that last title roar is the Enrage cast. And now we have to quickly head on to the next trash pack. So the next trash pack has 4 different mobs. 2 of them are going to be marked with shields and 2 of them with swords. It'll always be the wood golems with the swords first, and it'll always be the other ones with the shields first. They're going to slowly walk around the arena, occasionally turning and, passing through the middle, which you'll see after the first few turns. You'll see one passing through the middle on my left here in a second. There he goes. So the ones with the swords deal more damage, but can be killed. The ones with the shields don't deal much damage, but they're impossible to kill. So you essentially need to kill the wood golem, and then after you kill a wood golem, it swaps. So the ones with the swords and the shield swap. So now the other golems, the Isle Keepers, they will now have the sword. So now we need to pull an Isle Keeper, then a wood golem, then an Isle Keeper, all while avoiding them as they walk around. On top of that, for every one you kill, all of the remaining ones get faster and faster. So you have to make sure you understand their movements and that you don't end up in their paths. Now, to talk about the mobs themselves, the Isle Keeper does Ancient Quagga, big raid wide, leaves a dot behind. It does, I think it's called Ground Shaker. It's coming up in a second here. Gravity Force. I was not even remotely close. Gravity Force, which is a split damage AoE, followed by Isle Drop, which is an untelegraphed on Savage, but telegraphed at the last second, at least on normal, AoE. So it aims it at a player and does that ground AoE. So you can see we're just rotating around. We're going to grab this mob right here, and then we're going to pull it a little bit south. And then for the Wood Golem, they try to cast an arrow, like an interruptible raid-wide AoE. If it goes off, you're dead. So make sure that you interrupt the first cast. Then they cast Tornado, which binds the player, and then they use Oviation, which does a line AoE in the bound player's direction. As soon as the bind, don't be in front of the mob. Now, there is one final thing to consider with these mobs. They all do have individual enrages. So if you take too long to kill a mob, they will eventually do a long cast and just wipe you out. So that's the incentive to not pull the defense ones, because if you hold them for too long, they're just going to enrage and you're going to die. There's nothing you can really do about that. You can see he's really schmoving now. Look at him go. Bam. There we go. Now on Savage, these hit incredibly hard. On normal, the damage they deal is not really much of a threat. So it is really about making sure you just don't pull 2 of them at the same time, because you just won't be able to beat the check. I mean, even if you were to pull 2 swords at the same time, you'd have to kill them at nigh identical moments to make sure that the defense buff doesn't make it unkillable, because that's just what's going to happen. But other than that, yeah, we'll just deal with all the ads, get used to the pathing, make sure that you don't get, you don't get crept up on by one. And they're all sight aggro too, so as long as you aren't directly in front of them and you don't splash them with an AoE, it's quite easy to navigate in such a way that you don't have to do that much movement, but over moving is definitely the safer of the routes that you could possibly do here. Then you come to the second boss, the Lala. I know it's a really big Lala, but this one's all about rotating debuffs. It's basically going to give you a debuff, show you where you're supposed to get hit, and then rotate where you're supposed to get hit or where the boss is going to hit. In my opinion, one of the easiest Criterion bosses of all of them, but still definitely confusing for some people who aren't good at thinking about rotations or just forget how clocks work, which after a long day of Savage can absolutely happen. Inferno Theorem, just raid-wide AoE. So this first AoE, if you've seen it on normal mode, then you kind of understand how it works, but there is an extra element here on Criterion. I'm sorry, in Variant works one way. In Criterion, there's some extra elements to it. So for one, it'll show you the safe spot from this 270-degree AoE. The actual animation of the skill shows you the rotation. So this is showing you a counterclockwise rotation. So this AoE is going to rotate counterclockwise. Finally, the debuff tells you the number of times it is going to rotate 90 degrees. So it's letting you know it's going to rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise 3 times. Or if you're so inclined, that essentially translates to clockwise once. So that was the way a lot of people really identified it. Counterclockwise 3 is actually clockwise 1, or they just treat it as -1. It can either be 3 or 5. So essentially, it's always going to be rotating 90 degrees. It's just about which direction. Is it clockwise? Is it counterclockwise? Is it 3 rotations? Is it 5 rotations? In this case, we know that it's going to be on delta because it's rotating 3 counterclockwise. So we just head over there, and you'll see that we are perfectly safe. So that's just the teaching part. That's just letting you know how the rotation itself works. It's not guaranteed lethal if you get hit. On Savage, it probably is, but, you know, it does give you a damage down, which you don't want. So now we have analysis. Basically, you need to make sure that you only ever get hit from the open side. We've seen this in plenty of raids before. Mustadio, of course, comes to mind. This will get rotated at the end of the mechanic. So for now, we just need to make sure that we just do it as is. But for the very last hit, it's actually going to rotate right before the hit comes out. So these arrows on the ground are going to gradually fill. The light up arrows, I should say, are going to be the starting point for what is essentially a death wall. If you touch it, you get a bleed, and the bleed will kill you instantly. At least on Savage, it will. On normal, I think it will also. It's just on variant where it's not really much of a threat. So when it hits an arrow, it actually turns and goes in that direction. And then it'll continue until it hits the wall without hitting another arrow. Any orb it passes through will explode for raid-wide damage, and that's what you want to be aiming the open section for. So we can see there's an orb here, literally right in front of an arrow. So as soon as Angular Addition finishes casting and these start going off, we need to make sure that our open side is faced towards that orb first. If we go back a little bit, you can also see that there was another orb kind of to the right of A here. That orb is going to be basically at the very end of the mechanic. So right before we do the final swap with our debuff, we're going to need to make sure that we have flipped around and that our open side is facing towards that. So he's casting Angular Addition. First one's going to go off. You can see me making sure my back is to the orb behind me. The Radiance hit is the big thing. Now, as soon as Angular Addition is actually cast, 2 things have happened this time. He's actually going to do an Arcane Blight. That's the mechanic we just saw before. And this is going to do the same thing, clockwise or counterclockwise 3 or 5 times. This is counterclockwise 5 times. So it essentially means it's going counterclockwise once, because that means it goes all the way around in a circle and then one more. On top of that, we have to make sure we don't touch those walls on the outside that are going to, you know, encroach in and give us a much smaller space to work with. But the other thing that's happened is the player themselves has gotten a 3 or a 5, and that too will have a clockwise or counterclockwise rotation. So first, make sure we solve for Arcane Blight. I'm already in my safe spot because it's counterclockwise 1. And now you can see right about here, I have a clockwise buff. So this is what the clockwise one looks like versus the counterclockwise one right above it. Really good to have them side by side like that. And so I know that my analysis is going to rotate clockwise 3 or counterclockwise 1. So my east side, the right side of my character, is going to be safe at the very end. I highly advise that you figure out a way to just do all of this one at a time, because it's basically a ton of things being layered on top of you, happening back to back to back to back to back. And this is the part that gets people the most. This exact mechanic, I think, is the hardest mechanic of this boss, much like how the first mechanic was the hardest mechanic of the previous boss, because it's just so many rotations to consider at once. So we know that D is safe here, but I'm also solving for my own thing, but I also need to make sure that I don't get hit by the orb that's along the outside. So that's the second orb, the second Radiance orb. And now I have until targeted light finishes casting until I need to make sure I'm turned to face the right direction. So this is me figuring out at the last second, making my turn. It changes. I'm good. If you fail it, it's not guaranteed lethal unless you're missing a lot of health. It will do some damage. It'll knock you back, and it will give you a 30-second damage down. We're even here on Criterion Savage, and that didn't stop us. In fact, we get multiple damage downs throughout this fight, and we still managed to beat the check fairly comfortably. It really helps coming in with a resource opener from the trash beforehand, because it gives you that extra leeway to make a couple of mistakes that are non-lethal. But that's it for that mechanic. And again, I think that is the hardest mechanic of this fight. Now, there is a tank buster here. Strategic Strike hits 3 times very hard. I either recommend dumping tons of cooldowns on it or using your invuln on that. We actually super dump cooldowns on the first one and then home gang the second is what our tank did. And then super cooldown the third and then home gang the fourth if it were to come to that. Now, the next mechanic is going to be, actually, what is the exact name? Planner tactics. I got so used to calling this something else. We called it 1-2-2-3 because now we have a debuff called Subtractive Suppressor Alpha. Subtractive Suppressor Alpha will explode if you have it when it wears all the way off, but every time you would take an instance of damage, it negates all of that damage and instead reduces the count by 1. So players are basically being told how many times they have to be hit by a mechanic, no more than that, in order to properly disarm it before the end of everything. So that's why we call it 1-2-2-3, because it determines the entire layout of what we do here. So you're now given these 8 arcane mines, and those are going to be what you use to disarm all of your suppressors, your alpha suppressors. But the way the circle is laid out means you have to figure out a way that it just kind of works for everyone. And fortunately, we found a really easy way to do it. I'll reorient myself in a second so it'll make more sense. But essentially, one and both the 2s line up along one side of the square, and then the 3 lines up along the other and then just takes 3 in a row. I'm the 3 in this case, so you'll get to see the 3 movement. But there is one more element in play. There are 2 shared sentences here. Now, these are going to target a role, either support or DPS, but they can target it in such a way that you need to do a slightly different alignment for the landmines. This is what we would consider a standard alignment, where one of the 2s has a shared sentence and either the 1 or the 3. If both of the 2s have shared sentence, you have to do a slightly different alignment and make sure that different people are taking everything together. So let's play it through first, and then I'll explain. So see that empty square? That empty square is what we use to designate the entire alignment of the mechanic. So this is kind of what our like true north looks like. You know, this is how we treat the mechanic. We just reorient our camera to figure out where we need to go. So along the west side, or along, I guess, the left side of this true north looking arrangement, we would have 2, then 2, then 1. So the 1 needs to be all the way out here, and you'll see why in a second. And both the 2s need to be grouped up kind of close together over here. When the 2s go through the mines, they're going to go through this mine and this mine, and the 2s are going to go through this mine and this mine. So this kind of 2x2 here gets all claimed by the 2s. The 1 only wants to hit this 1 that I'm basically standing on right now, and the 3 wants to wipe out the 3 that are on this side. So that's really all it is. And then the 2s are going to be close together because they're doing a shared sentence, and the 3 and the 1 are going to meet up right here to do the other shared sentence. Now, there is another important bit, but I'll get to that in a second, because we do have a forced march. This forced march is going to be rotated clockwise or counterclockwise. So same deal. If it's a forward march, counterclockwise 3, that means I know that it's clockwise 1. So you're going to see me whip my camera around as soon as I figure it out. So that means I'm going to get marched right. So I need to make sure my orientation is right when my forced march wears off. And then I will slowly walk through all of these mines to disarm them. Now, the most important thing is that the 3 is as close to their starting mine as possible. And the 1 is a few steps away from kind of the same orientation. So like the 1 would be like here, for example, over in their spot, and the 3 here. The main reason for that is because as we're disarming the mines, I need to reach my 3rd mine before the 1 gets to that spot to split the damage. So you see, I disarm mine 1, mine 2. I need to make it to this square before the 1 marker does, because otherwise they're going to die, and then we're going to fail the mechanic. So, bam, I take that. All of us are disarmed now. We take the split damage AoEs, and then there's an Inferno Theorem right after. Now, if both of the 2s get shared sentence, what changes here is not that significant. Both the 2s and the 1s are still all lined up along this kind of west wall over here, this left relative wall. The difference being the 2 and the 1 kind of have to be right here, close to each other, because the 2 and the 1 are going to do a shared sentence that ends right here. The 3, instead of going here, where my mouse cursor is, would go here, and they would meet the 2 on this side. So the 2 would march this way, and the 3 would march up this way. So the 3 has the biggest adjustment here. The 2 also needs to know to be, again, a few steps out to make sure they don't trigger the 3rd mine before you do. But those are the only 2 possibilities. And once you get used to both of them, it's fairly quick to identify. You're just looking for what number you have, do both of the 2s have shared sentence, and then orientation done. So it's a little confusing to learn initially, but because there's only 2 major possibilities for the entire arrangement, it doesn't end up being that difficult to execute. But again, some people aren't really good with the whole rotation thing. So what your most likely mistake is going to be, also I should make mention, the same thing can happen with the 1 and the 3. If one, I shouldn't have just said the 2 and the 2 have the shared sentence. The 1 and the 3 can also both have the shared sentence, which would lead to the same result, I guess. I guess I should have said if both the 2s either do have them or don't have them. If they have matching buffs or debuffs, or matching buffs or lack of buffs, then it would lead to the same result. It would lead to you needing to solve it the other way. But either way, the biggest thing that's going to happen is people are going to mess up their rotations and run immediately into the wall. So expect that to be kind of the biggest headache you have here, and less about actually solving how to do it correctly. Yeah, if 1 and 3 had it, we would have also made the same swap where I would have started, at the bottom of the square relative to everything. Make sure you have some MIT for this Inferno theorem as well right after, because it hurts. And honestly, the rest of the fight's kind of on cruise control. Like, it's going to confuse you if you've never seen it before, if you haven't done it before. But all of the remaining mechanics are so easy. This boss is, in my opinion, by far the easiest Criterion boss of all of them. So next is spatial tactics. This is going to give us those debuffs again, the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s. Except now it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So same deal. You just have to be hit that many times to make sure that you properly disarm it. And then you get Arcane Array, which is going to summon these boxes. These boxes do Bomberman-style explosions. They basically hit an across AoE across the row and column that they're on. And you need to be hit by the correct number of them, and no more than that, to make sure that you properly disarm your suppressor. The big thing is there is also a Radiance Orb. So everyone's count is going to be reduced by 1 immediately. So that means the 1's responsibility is just don't get hit by any of the squares. But there's positions that make this so simple to solve that you barely need to think about it. So the first thing that's going to happen, I like to stand. This is not the only spot you can stand, but this is my favorite spot to stand because I'm a 4. I have arguably the most difficult thing to do, but 2, 3, and 4 can all kind of start in the same spot. I think 2 actually has a better spot a little bit on the other side of the room. I think there's like one. I think the 4th row only gets hit a single time no matter what. So I think they can just stand there and eat the second one. But I always go just to this spot, away from the orb, and then right here next to this square. So the big thing is behind me was another square. So as soon as the mechanic starts, I've already been hit twice. If I was the person who was, who needed to be hit twice, then I'd be done here. But where you see our Dragoon over here, I think if you stand here as a 2, it also basically you resolve it and then you can stand there for the rest of the mechanic. Yeah, that's going to be safe for the rest of the mechanics. That's probably the absolute best spot for 2 is basically just, 2 rows over from where you see in my orientation. As a 4, though, I have 2 options. I can do what is called the quick and dangerous or the slow and steady. And as a ranged, I should be doing the slow and steady, but I'm a jerk. So I do it the other way. So standing where I'm standing will get hit a 3rd time. So essentially, if you have a 3, you can stand where I'm standing, and then you're just done with the mechanic. Like, go there from the beginning, you'll get hit 3 times, and then you're done. If you have a 4, you need to do 1 extra movement. So I can choose to either be hit by this square back here, or there's actually a square here, but obviously the timing is going to be really tight. So you see the square I'm standing right here. This one, as soon as the square appears there, I've been hit. It's registered a hit for me. And in fact, I think you can already see my count's already been reduced to 1. Look, it goes from 2. I haven't even seen the animation yet, and my count has already been reduced to 1. So I can already make kind of like a forced movement into the next square to just stay in melee range the whole time. And then same deal here. As soon as that one goes over, I get hit the last time and I'm done. The safer thing to do, especially as even as a melee, it would be the safer thing to do. You would just have to step away from the boss, would be to stand here and then back up to this spot because I have way more time to safely go from here to here and make sure that I get hit the 4th time. So you can see I do the quick movement, but look at that square over there. Just gets, it hasn't gone off yet. bam. Same on the other side. There's another one all the way over there as well, but, you know, I just always like to do it in that one spot. And finally, there's an angular addition. He's doing Arcane Blight. He's clockwise 3 times, so, you know, counterclockwise 1, which means alpha, which I do at the very last second, much to my own dismay, but I'm safe. That's all that matters. So very easy. If 1, 2, and 3 barely have to do anything, and 4 has to move like once. So no biggie. Inferno Theorem, he'll do it twice in a row here before the final new mechanic. The final new mechanic is really scary to look at, and then it's actually like ultra easy. Like you just have to make it, you have to slip up on your positioning briefly for you to die, which will happen, but it's it definitely is one of those looks way worse than it is. So finally we have Symmetric Surge. So this mechanic you can actually predict very far in advance. This is going to give 2 players a shared sentence. Now, I will say this. We never once had a situation where it was anything other than roll. So it was always either both DPS with shared sentence or both the supports. And I think like almost every time, if not every time, both the DPS had it. So we never had to do like any weird swaps here. I'm hoping there's not a case where there's a potential swap here where it's like, you know, me and my healer have it, so we have to swap. If there is, I'm sorry, we never saw it. In all of the times we did the second boss in both normal and savage, we never saw this deviate. So I hope we didn't get Final Fantasy. But at this point, right after that, he actually summons these adds along the wall. You can see them spawn these Aloalo golems, and they're very similar to the golems that we were killing before. I'm trying to get the name of the cast because I totally missed it. Unless he doesn't have a name for the cast when he does Symmetric Surge. And he just does an animation. Come on. Symmetric Surge. Get to it. There you go. I think he just does an animation for summoning them. So yeah, there's our debuff. Oh no, Constructive Figure. There you go. He just did it so quickly after I couldn't skip around. So Constructive Figure will spawn golems along the outer edge. 3 golems. They're going to fire a line AoE through. So you're going to need 2 players, in our case, the healer and the ranged, and the melee and the tank, lined up kind of with each of them. Now, the other thing that I always noticed is that I guess, how do I even describe this? The like westmost relative one was always the range side. We never once had a situation where kind of where I'm starting was the starting location for the next part of the mechanic, where you can see these arrows going across. These are essentially going to box us into the center area of the arena, and we have to solve a few mechanics from here. So, big thing is we have the melees, the tank and the melee go close to where the arrows actually start, and we have the ranged and the healer go far from where the arrows start, and we have to start in a safe column or row in this case. We are going to get a debuff from the boss here called Arcane Point. This is going to create death squares on the ground, similar to the ones that are traveling across the room from the arrows themselves. So we dodge the initial line AoEs, and then we drop these, and we move into where the line AoEs hit. So these are the only safe places. There's an entire row of safe spaces that I don't think there's any feasible way you could ever use those to do the next mechanic properly. So we always just had this solution. It's either we started in that other row that we started in, or you start against the wall. It's just one of 2 possible patterns, basically. Then we get these explosive theorems, and these are not only going to do a small AoE around each of us, but they leave a ground AoE afterwards. So we have to make sure that we leave a small safe space here so we can move in afterwards to do the split damage AoE. You can see that the melee and the tank do the same thing. Then we just heal up, mitt. We each take our split damage AoEs, and we're good. And that's the whole fight. The only thing that's going to happen is you're going to repeat the analysis from the beginning. So if you struggle with the analysis, getting good at analysis helps you here, because in Savage, you're very likely going to see the second one. We did also get a Strategic Strike into an Inferno Theorem, which did a lot. It was very scary. But you can see this is otherwise identical, and we're just pooling resources at this point for the next fight. Bam, we do that. In fact, we get a damage down here, but we end up having so much time, it doesn't matter. Yeah, on normal, the damage down for screwing this up is not that big a deal as long as you don't die to damage. It's more important that you don't go into the wall from the knockback, so make sure you stand kind of close. Yeah, see, it's got another damage down right there. So that was no biggie. The damage down didn't really end up mattering all that much. And then another Strategic Strike. I was more worried about the Strategic Strike than anything else, but Home Gang's there. And we kill the second boss, and bam, whether you're on normal or savage, you're right on to the third boss. And it is a pixie with a gun. Yeah, if you did normal mode, you're not too surprised by this, but I'll never get over just saying the final boss is a pixie with a gun. And that is one dangerous pixie. This is one of the most threatening final bosses of all the Criterions. For not always the best reasons, but, you know, still, you'll understand when we get to it. So in Savage, we had about 6.5 minutes left here, and the Enrage on this boss is 5 minutes and 50 seconds. So we actually had plenty of time to wait for our cooldowns, wait for our 2 minutes, put down markers, save them in case we didn't kill it. This was our first attempt at the third boss on an actual Savage run after practicing the normal mode boss for hours and hours and hours. Again, they're mechanically identical. So we just pull with, 6 minutes and 5 seconds left on the overall timer, which has been over here the whole time in case you haven't been paying attention. And the first 70% of this boss, again, tough to learn, but not tough to execute. The last 30%, tough to learn and tough to execute. So it really all comes down to nailing down that final 30% and making sure you're ultra confident in that more than anything else. Arrow 4s and AoE. Now, Trick Reload is the main mechanic of this fight, and it is, tricky one. So the fairy's going to load 8 bullets, or it's going to attempt to load 8 bullets into its gun. It only has 6 chambers, so 2 of those bullets are going to fail. And the mechanics that you'll do after the gun is loaded change depending on which bullets fail. So either the first bullet or 8th bullet will always be a fail. And then it'll be one of the other 6 bullets that also fails alongside of it. So it could be 1 and 3, 1 and 6, 2 and 8, 5 and 8. It can never be 1 and 8. That's the one thing it can never, ever be. Now, that's, again, going to change some of the mechanics that come later. So we had 1 fail here, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1 and 7 failed here. So that's important to know for later. Next attack is trap shooting. This mechanic is one of the mechanics that changes depending on where the failed bullets are. If the first chamber is a failed bullet, a failed load, then trap shooting is going to be a stack AoE the first time it casts and a spread AoE the second time it casts. If she successfully loads a bullet into the first chamber, so it's like an 8 fail pattern, then it will be a spread damage AoE first and a split damage AoE later. So you can see here we're all stacking up. She failed the first bullet. So bam, we stack up. It's because she tries to shoot the meteor to break it up. And if she doesn't have a bullet in the chamber, then she can't shoot it to break it up. So that's what happens. Next is Trigger Happy. So because she technically emptied a chamber, the Trigger Happy is one of the remaining chambers is still empty. So this is you identifying which one of them it is. So the first chamber is spent. Now chambers 2 through 7 are being judged, but since she spent 1, it goes down by 1. So this was a 1-7 pattern, but because she fired the first shot, that means the 6 is safe. So it's basically whatever bullet failed to load minus 1. And it's all, again, that's why it's always the 2 through the 7 that you have to pay attention to. So because it was the 7th bullet loaded, we go to the 6th pizza slice, and that one is going to be safe. Now she still has her 8th chamber, which has a bullet in it. So it's weird because technically that's not how it works. Listen, you understand how it works. Anyway, so now these bombs that she's going to shoot out, I believe it's called Ring of Explosions or something like that. Ring O explosions. So there's going to be 2 triangles of bombs here. One of them is going to have a bomb lit up. Those 3 bombs, the bomb that's lit up plus the 2 it's tethered to, are all going to do point blank explosions. The other set of bombs will do nothing. So it's a safe zone. So we basically now need to do the other trap shooting pattern in whatever remaining space is open. We know it was stacked first, so it's spread second. So we just spread out in what is some of the remaining safe spot, which you'll see here. And then it all comes down, and we're good. Now that's the first trick reload. We are going to get another trick reload right after that with a different set of mechanics joining the stacks and the spreads. So this one is a pretty complicated one to learn initially, but you'll learn to enjoy this one quite a bit because the first 2 trick reloads, again, don't really have a whole lot of craziness. So let's count the bullets together. She actually does that in variant as well. So 1 failed, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 failed. So 1 and 5 are our failed bullets. So we know it's stack first, and the 4 pizza slice will be open later. So Now we have more sets of bombs. There are other patterns of bombs. We've just gotten the same one twice in a row. And then we have dartboard dancing explosive. So she's going to turn the entire arena into one big dartboard, and she's going to start rotating these bombs around. So the big thing here is you need to identify where the danger bombs are, and then you need to do the remaining mechanics away from them on this dartboard. The good news is we actually got center, safe, and stack. This is by far the easiest pattern you can get. Not that any of them are particularly hard. We can stay very close to the center of the room, resolve the stack, and the other mechanic that's here. 3 players have been targeted by dart debuffs. You can see it's on the other DPS, the healer, and the tank. And we need to make sure that they're all on a different color on the dartboard. So for this, we did really just try to do it where, you know, DPS is red, healer is, I think that's, is that yellow? I don't know, I'm colorblind. Yellow, sure. And tank is blue. So, I mean, either way, you can figure it out. You know what I'm trying to say. Just stop making the colorblind guy do color mechanics and then describe them later. So that's how you want it. But however, a tanker or a healer can be missing a dart. So like both the DPS could have the dart. So you need to have one of your DPS able to flex to either the yellow or the blue dart positions. But in this case, this is what we call a no flex situation. So we're all just on our default colors. So we're going to stack up near the center, make sure that we're kind of just in the pizza slice we belong to. And then that's it. That just lets us resolve the mechanic. The only thing that really changes, if you're spread, make sure that you're properly spread out and that you're also on the correct part of the dartboard, and make sure you're not near the bombs. It is important to know where the bombs are going to hit, but if the middle is safe, the mechanic just gets so much easier. And you can see uncommon ground goes off. You see all the darts, all of the board lights up, but nobody dies. It's just a whole bunch of damage. So make sure you got mitt, heal, shields, all that stuff for this part. Now, she has done her stack, which means the next trap shooting is a spread. So that needs to be paid attention to because that's going to matter at the very end. Next is surprise balloon. This is going to summon 2 balloons, and then she's going to throw darts at the balloons, and they're going to pop and do knockbacks. So she's also going to give everyone a forced march, but you don't need to worry about that for a little bit. Now, this is where the chambers come into play because now we need to remember the chamber from before. That's going to be 4. So we need to make sure we're all here. When these balloons get popped, they do a knockback, but the knockback can be arm's length or sure casted. I highly advise, no matter what, you can technically prevent both knockbacks from both balloons. I advise focusing on stopping the first knockback from the first balloon, because what's intended is you're supposed to ride the balloon knockback into the correct pizza slice, but we just forego that. It just eliminate that little variable because it makes the whole mechanic way easier. On top of that, you're going to see these dart AoEs passing through. They're not lethal if they hit you. They don't even give you damage reduction, but they do like 14 or 15,000 damage. So if you can, avoid the darts as they're coming out, but it's not end of the world if you do get hit by one. So we're all in 4. We all have our arm's length and everything up. So we all just stand here and just sidestep these darts. And then the last balloon, we do take the knockback. It's not a super big knockback, as you can see, but either way, it's just something to bear in mind so you don't go into the wall. Finally, she's going to start casting trap shooting, and our forced marches have 3 seconds. So we know that this trap shooting is spread, so we have to forced march into spread positions. We just picked A, B, C, or D. You know, I'm C, so you're going to see me forced march over there. And if it was stacked, then we'd all forced march into the middle of the room. That would be the only difference for this particular part. Bam, done. Arrow 4 right afterwards, so just make sure you have all that mitt. And this is when we all like to say, this is when the fight starts, because the next 2 mechanics really are quite difficult, and the last mechanic is not that difficult. She goes untargetable here and summons bombs. So there's 2 different patterns here. This is what I would consider the quote hard pattern, but only because this is another spot where we committed to a strategy that was more consistent regardless of bomb pattern, but more difficult if we got this bomb pattern in particular. So for this bomb pattern, the triangle that's going through the middle, this acute triangle, is always going to be the danger one. Even before seeing any of the bombs light up, you just know that's going to be danger. So, you know, this bomb is going to be a safe zone, and this bomb behind my camera in the VOD are all going to be safe zones. That's good starting information, but the way that you're supposed to do the mechanic changes drastically when it's this pattern. So she's going to drop 4 present boxes, and 2 of them are going to have claws that spawn kind of close to the middle of the room. And it's also going to drop 2 missiles on the far side of the room. So the 2 players with the claws are going to get a 2-stack enumeration. So they need to make sure they stay full away from their claws while dodging the bombs, while getting stacked for enumeration at the end of the mechanic. The 2 players with missiles are going to have chains that need to be broken. Now, those chains are based on how close you are when you start the mechanic. So you basically want to start in the very middle of the room where that middle bomb is, actually, directly under it where the fairy is, and then run opposite directions. But you also need to make sure you're running away from your missile. So I'm the missile here, so it'll be easy to describe. If you have a missile, you are running towards the side of the room away from your missile. But we split it kind of like true north based on where that, see the point of the safe triangle of bombs? That's kind of our orientation for this particular pattern. So my missile is like northeast-ish. I'm going to go directly west. And my partner's missile is west-ish. They're going to go directly east. We need to start as close on top of each other as possible. I cannot stress this enough. This is the most stressful chain break I've ever done in Final Fantasy XIV. Because there's the staff AoEs, there's the exploding bombs, there's the missile chasing you, and this chain requires a near perfect all the way to the edge of the arena before snapping. It is so incredibly frustrating and is by far the most difficult thing about this fight. Also, I swear, like 20% of the time, this wall has hands and like reaches out and grabs you and decides, you know, you're not in the death wall, but I've decided you're in the death wall. Here is not one of those cases. I friggin' lose control of my mouse and start swerving and trying to fix it at the same time, and I somehow still survive. I don't know how. I knocked something over. I got so excited about it. I don't know how. I panicked. I panicked so much. I can't even believe it. So that's what we need to do. What I've decided that the enumerations need to do on this pattern is they're actually going to meet at that bomb that I'm looking at directly now, the one that's kind of right behind D. They're going to meet in that small safe spot up there. They need to make sure they kind of take a wide berth, kiting their claws around, and then meet right before the enumeration itself actually expires. If you are doing the hard pattern with the chains and the missiles, you need sprint. I can't stress enough that I would not do this without sprint, which is why I don't like the way that we decided to do this, because I know an easier way to do it. So you see me, I go west, my partner goes east, the chain, oh, I made it full screen by accident. I was trying to pause it so quick. Let's go back a little bit. So maybe I should just press the space bar. I get to the edge here. You want to see this chain break almost right at this moment. If you don't, it can go very bad very quickly. They also, it looks like they maybe tried to go to their safe spot a little bit sooner than me, so I didn't get my break as cleanly. So there's my chain actually breaking. And because of this strategy, I need to make it to that little sliver of a safe spot right there before this staff explodes, which you can see the cast bar on the left-hand side right here, and before the bombs explode. And I'm right next to one too. So you can see I have to sprint all the way over. There's almost no... Now, I could technically make it into that little tiny safe spot as well. But either way, it's not the greatest. And you can see here that I swivel out at the last second before it actually goes off. And yeah, it's just absolutely brutal on the movement. And then on the other side of the room, the enumerations are just all stacked up. They're just... You can see them over there by the bomb. They just made sure they weren't in the actual bomb explosion and their claws didn't catch up to them. The claw job is easy no matter what. What I think you should be doing, if you get this pattern, if I go back to here, one of the chains should be going directly forward in the direction I'm looking. One should be going directly back and then swerving clockwise, while the enumerations go to the southeast side relative to where this is. You know, they go like bottom right of my current screen. I think that is way safer than what we did, but it requires you to understand 2 different movements for 2 different bomb patterns. The other bomb pattern is ultra easy. The enumerations just go opposite of the middle bomb. It's like pointing in the direction they need to go towards the wall. And then both the chains could just go east-west, no adjustment, no movement. The stabs will never get in the way. So that's why we did it this way, because the other pattern, it was so easy to do it this way. So this way we just made it work. And it's so much harder, and I would not recommend it. Learn both patterns, and you'll have a much easier time with your level of consistency than we did. So, yeah, just do it one more time. Watch me swerve and barely survive because West Coast ping, literally the only reason. Oh, don't worry. that's going to come back to bite me in a second here, because I'm going to get my justice or my just desserts all in a second. Then right after that, Tank Buster, shocking abandon. I actually kind of forgot that Tank Buster was even there. I just didn't even think about it. And then the next mechanic is the other hard mechanic of the fight, and that is pinwheeling dartboard. So it's another one of the dartboard mechanics, and it also summons the pinwheels from normal. So first of all, there is a dart on the arena that is on a yellow. There are also 2 players with dart debuffs. So, common sense here. One dart player needs to be on red and the other needs to be on blue for this particular one. The other 2 just basically need to be on the colors that aren't covered by the arena already. Now, we had to come up with a whole bunch of rules and setups and ways of identifying where to go and what to do. We actually got one of the easiest possible patterns here, where both people in the same role have a dart. That is the dream scenario here, because it makes the call able to be done super early about who goes where. It also makes it the most common sense. So what's going to happen is there's going to be 2 players with darts, and there's also going to be 2 players with chains. Players with darts can have chains. In fact, both of the players with darts can also be both of the players with chains, except when they both belong to the same role. So the chains will always target 1 DPS and 1 support. So what this does, with us both in the same role having the dart, it guarantees that the dart DPS is going to get a certain color, and whoever doesn't get the chain, in this case it'll be me, gets the other one. So we can see that it's on a yellow part of the dartboard, okay? That means that we need to orient around, see these like box AoEs for the pinwheels? These are gonna rotate. We need to find the AoE that's sitting on top of a red and a blue at the wall. You can actually see that all possible combinations are here. There's a red blue at the wall right here. There's a yellow red at the wall right here. And there's a yellow blue at the wall right here. So you just look at the dart color, and that determines which one of these 3 kind of acts as your relative spot for the mechanic. So we now also see the rotation. So because both of the DPS have it, we know whoever gets the chain and the dart is going to be on blue, because we're always sending DPS forward in our particular strategy. And so they'll always get the thing that is being rotated away from, which means I, as the remaining player who doesn't get the chain, will guaranteed have to go to red. I too need to make sure that I'm chasing the AoE, so I know to go back here. See this spot right here? I know I'm going to be on this particular section. That is something I have already figured out from practice and from just understanding the mechanic, and it's something absolutely anyone can do, but it is an absolute cluster to figure out the first time. And as soon as you start getting mixed roles and everything, then the rule sets that you need become more and more complex. Like if it was me and the healer that had the dart, and I had no chain and he had a chain, he's not going towards that section. He's going opposite of that section. I'm of the opinion, whichever chain, and then both the chains can have darts, so you can't like prioritize the dart being forward unless you want to prioritize deep. If you have both DPS and support with a dart and a chain, the DPS is always forward, but if not, you have the dart always go forward. If it's just one of them, it's way too much thinking. That's why we just sent DPS forward, support back, and then it's just a matter of understanding the rotation. In this case, if the support was a chain and a dart, they would go to this red section back here, because again, it's away from the rotation that this thing is going towards, and I would have to be on the blue, which would put me here. It would put me here or here. Here would be the best spot. Here is actually pretty much guaranteed going to die. So yeah, you pretty much always want to be somewhere on this little section right here in the middle. These 4. And then, of course, if you know what color you're going to, you can kind of cheat away from everything. But you could have the enumeration, which you'll see in a second, and not have a dart, which means you need to position it in such a way that the dart player can do it. It's just so many little elements that need to be stacked up and added together. So you'll see, I get the enumeration. So what should happen here is myself and the other non-chained player, which would be the warrior in this case, we need to go over towards where the B marker is in order for me to get to my spot, because that's the one that's rotating away. What you'll notice happens instead is I go alone. I am abandoned, and I'm in the correct spot, and I die. However, I solved my uncommon ground, so that keeps everyone else alive, so that is a thing to prioritize. Worry more about solving uncommon ground so that you don't murder everyone else if you're in enumeration and you have to die like that, versus just saying, oh, I'm dead anyway, because in this particular case, it could get you the clear. So then on top of that, after all of those, oh, and then I didn't even mention, yeah, so then the chains go off. There are the defamations. Again, they need to make sure they start as middle as possible. They break the chain, and they actually leave enough space for the enumeration person to do their mechanic. So you can see there, if I had to do that blue, I actually would have died. Now, of course, this is actually, so funny thing, I think with the way we decided to do this, we made it so that that could never happen. We've just like done it in such a way that it will always kind of be safe for you on the color that you need it to be. But it serves as a good visual example because people are going to be nervous about that when they do this mechanic themselves. And then the fire AoEs keep rotating, so don't get lax. Make sure you don't get hit by any of those as they continue to rotate. Get back to the middle. And at this point, I'd like to say you're basically done with the fight. It's the remaining DPS check. And since we're on Savage, I'm stuck on the ground. I can't get back up. There's no way to res me. There's no variant raise on Savage. You can't use regular raise, and you have the raise debuff here. I'm dead. And I get to be a spectator for the last mechanic, which of course we had practiced a bunch, but still, at least I get to explain it to you while I get it from one angle. So first is going to be Beguiled Glitter, and it's going to be 2 different duration forced marches. You can see that there are 2 down arrows with 33 seconds remaining, and then the right arrow with 44 seconds remaining. Then the fairy is going to do a trick reload. 1, 2 failed. So we know because 1 was successful and 2 failed, we know it's 2-8. So we know the 1 pizza slice will be safe later. It'll be spread first and then stack. All that information is given to you as soon as you see that first bullet either succeed or fail. And then you just need to know the other bullet that actually fails. So they're going to spread out. Fortunately, if somebody's dead, it does not double up the spreads. Another really fortunate thing that happened here. And then we get a present box. Again, the present boxes are going to have the stabs in them. So you're going to have to do the forced march, the pizza slice, the safe pizza slice, and dodge the stabs all at once. And then there's also going to be bombs on the ground, but you don't need to worry about the bombs just yet. So the bombs are going to be placed now. Don't worry about those. Those are going to be relevant later. So there's Trigger Happy. They get forced marched into the 1. You can see right there. So keep in mind, if you're being sent into, I mean, I guess technically you could do it safe from any direction, but we actually had like kind of a set way of doing it. If you're being sent into, I guess, 1 or 4, you could just start center and aim directly for the middle of the pizza slice because it's also in the middle of a staff, so you won't get hit. We made it so that if you're in any other pizza slice, you actually start like 2, 3, 5, or 6. You can start here. See this little like division right here between the donuts, and that will send you here to the far section safely enough. You could, of course, aim it here and here and here and here. You can do that too if you're comfortable with that. But that was our kind of like, oh, we have a ground designation just for making sure it's just a direct away from the boss. So that's just what we ended up doing. Then that goes off, the donuts go off, and now the second forced march is in about 6 seconds. This is where panic can set in because you need to remember, is it stack or spread? And then you need to make sure that you have a designated stack location and that the forced marches go there, or you have designated spread locations where you communicate it in some way, and that the forced marches don't go to a place somebody else is spreading. So here, fortunately, we got stack, and because this entire side of the room isn't safe, they can basically meet on the opposite side over by the 4 marker. So that's, you know, quickly communicated. That's if you see this pattern, that's kind of always like a safe presumption. So then they go over there, they split it. Thank goodness, even with 3 people, it's survivable. And then it's 2 AoEs and then Enrage. And we managed to get the clear on this, even though I'm dead for a minute and a freaking half. I'm so mad about that. Overall, really solid bosses. That second boss kind of acts as a nice kind of cooldown before you get to this boss, because this boss with the chains and the dartboard can get incredibly frustrating in that last 30 seconds. It's not bad, but I can't believe how strict that chain break is. If you are off by even a yalm, yes, I said yalm, it is going to be a nightmare to succeed, especially if you do it the way we did it, or we do the quote hard pattern the hard way. So overall though, really solid Criterion. Of course, it does have the rewards, the upgraded tombstone weapon. It lets you upgrade it to 665. They've all got unique glows. They're basically like mini ultimate weapons. And there's even a Blue Mage one in this particular case. I guess because they were all contest winners, they decided to make all of the contest winners from the same contest glowy for this. And that included Blue Mage in this particular case. I kind of hope they add a Viper or the Caster one, but I don't think they will. All the same, that is my walkthrough for the entirety of Aloalo Island on both, I guess, technically normal and savage. So definitely worth giving a peek, even if you don't really care much for the normal mode rewards, which are still quite underwhelming. Definitely a really fun dungeon. Trash isn't that frustrating. I think the trash in the other Criterions was tougher and not always in the fun way is the big thing. Like, it was just kind of like almost tedious and annoying, some of the trash there, especially reclearing. Here, it's a moderate threat. There's still some stuff to avoid. There's like an actual mechanic to each of the rooms, but it's not like, ugh, God, I don't want to do that again. The first boss has some really tricky and unique stuff, but isn't too crazy. The second boss is a nice reprieve. And the third boss is fun to learn, and then only relatively frustrating for those two mechanics in the middle at the end. So, yeah, that's it. That's all the mechanics for Aloalo Island. Hopefully you enjoyed this little walkthrough. I'm not sure if I'll do a more formal guide for it because, again, I'm not a huge fan of the way we did things, but I could always diagram out the way that I think it should be done, the way that I think would make it easier, and we'll see. I got a lot of stuff on my plate, so I at least wanted to make this going over all the mechanics. I am also going to do a review on all the Criterion bosses from the very beginning of the expansion through to the end. It's not going to be quite in this style. It's going to be more like my boss review videos, but either way, I'm looking forward to that, so I hope you are too. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for more on patch 6.51, 6.55 when that comes in January. And of course, we will have FanFest in January as well. With that, thanks, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye-bye.